Okay, so for lesson 14, we're going to round to the nearest hundred on a vertical number line. So we're moving from rounding to the nearest 10 to rounding to the nearest hundred. Okay, so first problem that we're working with is finding 132 and rounding that to the nearest hundred. So the number line's already been partially done, and this one you don't have to draw on your piece of paper. This one you can watch me do. So this one is fairly simple, just like rounding two-digit numbers to the nearest 10 was pretty simple. This one we're going to be working with three-digit numbers, which takes us to the hundreds place. I know that whenever I'm looking at 132, the first question I have to ask myself is how many hundreds is in 132. And I can see that there's 100. So just like we asked ourselves what's one more 10, this one we're going to ask what is one more 100. So that's where we get 200 from. And then this one, the halfway point between 100 and 100, or I'm sorry, 100 and 200 is going to be 150. Okay, so now all I have to do is put where 132 would go, and we're just going to guesstimate. Like if I was counting by tens, I would say here's like 110, here's 120, here's 130, so 132 would probably be somewhere over here. So it's just a guesstimate whenever you're putting it on the number line, but you want to have it close to where you think it would go. So 132 would probably fall about right there. So that tells me that 132 is closer to 100 than it is 200. So 132 rounded to 130. Okay, so once again, you'll need to draw a few number lines on your paper. Get about 3 or 4 drawn on your paper so that way you have them ready to round our next numbers that we're working with. So once you have 3 or 4 number lines drawn on your paper, you can push play so we can move on and work on this. Okay, so this next number that we're working with is 250. So the first thing that we have to ask ourselves is how many hundreds are in 250 since we're rounding to the nearest hundred. So when you look up here at the hundreds place, there are 2 hundreds in 250. So the first number on our number line is going to be 200. And then you ask yourself, what is one more 100 than 200? And that's going to give us 300. So our top number is 300. And then the halfway point between 200 and 300 is going to be 250. Okay, so now we are rounding 250. So we already know where 250 is on the number line. It's right here in the middle. And just like when we were rounding to the nearest 10, if it was in the middle, we rounded up. So we're automatically going to round 250 up to 300. Okay, our next one that we're going to be working with is 387. So you could just go ahead and write that up above your number line, and we're going to put what it's equal to in just a second. So I can see that there are 300s in 387, so our bottom number is going to be 300. One more 100 than 300 is going to be 400, so our top number is going to be 400. And the number that is halfway between 300 and 400 is 350. So now we need to put where 387 goes on our number line. We know that 387 is more than 350. If I were to count by tens, this would probably be 360, 370, 380. So somewhere right in here would probably be 387. So we're going to put that on our number line. And that shows us that 387 is closer to 400 than it was 300. So 387, when you round it to the nearest 100, rounds to 400. Okay, moving on to the next one. This one you can see actually has a number that's in the thousands place. So this is kind of like when we were working on rounding to the nearest 10, but we had a number in the hundreds place. This is exactly the same because we're rounding to the nearest 100, but we have a number in the thousands place. So just like before, the number in the thousands place stays the same. It's the number in the hundreds place that we're going to be looking at. So asking ourselves first is how many hundreds are in 1,582? You can see that there's a 5 in the hundreds place, so that tells me that there are 5 hundreds in this number. So our bottom number is going to be 1,500. Okay, and so what is one more hundred than 1,500? And that would give us 1,600. Okay? So what comes in between 500 and 600, halfway in between 500, 600, and that would be 555. So our 1,000 stays the same, and we would put 555 with it. Okay, so it's not that much harder. You just have to remember to keep the number in the thousands place the same. Okay, so now we've got to figure out where does 1,582 fall on the number line. So I know that 1,582 is going to be more than 1,555. So, and look, I put 555. It's 550. I don't know why I put 555. So, 1,555 or 50. If I were counting by tens, I'd say this would probably be 160, 170, and then 180. So 182 will be somewhere right around in here. So 1,582 is going to go about right there. So that tells us that 1,582 rounded to the nearest hundred is going to be 1,600. Okay, so if you can just keep in mind that first of all you have to know what you're rounding to, whether you're rounding to the nearest hundred or to the nearest 10, and if you have any numbers that are in front of those, whether it be in the hundreds place or the thousands place, those are going to stay the same. The numbers that you're looking at are the number that you're rounding to, whether it be the tens or the hundreds place. Okay, so here's another one that also has a number in the thousands place. This number is 2,146, and we're going to round that to the nearest hundred. So the first thing that we have to ask ourselves is how many hundreds are in this number, and you can see that there is a 1 in the hundreds place. So that tells me that there is 100 in this number. So our bottom number is going to be 2,100. One more hundred than 2,100 is going to be 2,200. And then our middle number, so asking ourselves what is halfway between 100 and 200, and that would be 150. So our middle number is 2,150. So what I want you to do on your number line is put where 2,146 is on our number line, and then I want you to round that to the nearest hundred. And once you have that on your piece of paper, you can push play to check and see if you are correct. So 2,146 is going to be pretty close to 2,150, which is our halfway point. And so since it's not past the 2,150, that means that it is still closer to 2,100 than it was to 2,200. So 2,146 is going to round to 2,100. Okay, this next one is 3,245, and I'm going to let you try this one on your own. Just remember that 3 in the thousands place is going to stay the same. You're going to be looking at the hundreds place, which is the 2, so you'll still ask yourself how many hundreds are in this number, what's one more hundred than that, and then make sure you put your halfway point, and then you'll have to put where this number goes on the number line. So I do want you to try this on your own. Once you've tried this, you can push play to see if you have it correct. Okay, so in 3,245 there are 2 hundreds, so our bottom number was 3,200. One more hundred than that would be 3,300. And then I know that halfway between 200 and 300 was 250, so I've got 3,250. And then our number that we're rounding is 3,245, which is once again going to be really close to our halfway point, because 45 is very close to 50. So 3,245 is going to go about right there on the number line. So that tells us that 3,245 is closer to 3,200 than it is to 3,300, and that's what it rounds to. So I hope that you did that correctly. And now we are ready to move on to the problem set. So if you want to have that out and ready in front of you. Okay, so starting with 3-digit numbers, which are the easier ones when you're rounding to the nearest hundredth place, because when you've got 3-digit, the highest number that you have is in the hundreds place. Okay, so our first one is going to be 143, so you have to ask yourself how many hundreds are in 143, and that's going to be 100. So that's going to be your lowest number on your number line. One more hundred than 100 would give you 200, and they already have the middle halfway point there for you, which is 150. So 143 we know is going to be less than 150, and it's probably going to go right in here somewhere. So we're going to put that on the number line, and that tells us that 143 is closer to 100 than it is 200. So that tells us that 143 is going to round to 100. So what I want you to go ahead and do is B and C, since those are 3-digit numbers and we are rounding to the nearest hundreds place, so those are simpler than the ones that we're rounding and they have the number in the thousands place. So I want you to go ahead and do B and C and go ahead and fill in your number lines and get what it's rounded to. And once you have B and C done, you can push play to check your answers. Okay, so 286 I know has 2 hundreds in it, and I know that one more hundred than that is 300, and I know that the halfway point between 200 and 300 is 250. 286 I know is more than 250, and it probably falls right in here somewhere. Well, I'm going to have to use it a different way. So right about right there. And that shows us that 286 is closer to 300 than it is 200, so 286 rounds to 300. Okay, so for C, our number is 320, so there are 300s in this number, and if I were thinking of one more hundred than 300, that would be 400. The halfway point between 300 and 400 is 350. And then 320 I know is less than 350, and it would probably fall right in here. So I'm going to put 320, and so this shows us that 320 is closer to 300 than it is 400. So 320 rounds to 300. Okay, now moving on to D. This one does have a number in the thousands place, and once again, that number in the thousands place is going to stay the same. We're going to be looking at the hundreds place, so we ask ourselves how many hundreds are in 320, and we know that there are 3 hundreds in that number, so our 1 stays the same, so it's going to be 1,300 as our lowest number. One more hundred than 1,300 is going to be 1,400, and then our halfway point between 300 and 400 is 350, so we keep our 1 the same, and we've got 1,350 right there in the middle. And if you notice, these two problems are exactly the same, except this one has 1,000 and this one did not have 1,000. So our 1,320 is going to go kind of right where our 320 went, which is going to show us that it is closer to 1,300 than it is to 1,400. So 1,320 rounds to 1,300. Okay, so we're going to do E together, and then I'm going to let you do F on your own. So E, since we're rounding to the nearest hundred, I see that we have 5 hundreds in this number. So our bottom number is going to be 1,500. One more hundred than 500 is 600, so our top number is going to be 1,600. And the halfway point between 500 and 600 is 550, so we've got 1,550. Now we're going to have to put where 1,572 goes. I know that 1,572 is more than 1,550, so this would probably be 100. or 1,560. So right around in here is probably where we would see 1,007 or 1,572. So we're going to put that on our number line. And we can see by looking at it that 1,572 is closer to 1,600, which means that it rounds to 1,600. Okay, so for F, I'm going to have you do this one on your own. Remember to look in the hundreds place, and that's going to help you label your numbers on the number line. So I want you to do your best that you can on this, and once you have it completed, you can push play to check your answer. Okay, so from looking at it, we see that there is a 2 in the hundreds place, which means that this one has 2 hundreds. So our first number at the bottom is 1,200. One more hundred than that is 1,300. And I know that halfway between 200 and 300 is 250. So our halfway point is 1,250, which is what our number actually is that we're rounding. Anytime we're at that halfway point already, we automatically round up. So 1,250 rounds up to 1,300. Okay, now we're ready for the back side. It says for A, it says Shauna has 480 stickers. Round the number of stickers to the nearest 100. So if you want to use a number line, definitely go ahead and do it. It's a lot easier to use a number line. That's what we're used to when we're doing these. So over here out to the side, we're just going to draw a smaller one. You might have to, since we've got all of these, we might have to make like a few number lines out to the side whenever we're doing this. But we're going to start with the smaller one whenever we're working with this. We got our top, goodness gracious, I can't get the lines drawn. Got our top, middle, and bottom lines as well. So since we are working with 480 and we're rounding that to the nearest 100, we're going to ask ourselves how many hundreds is in 480, and we know that there are 4 hundreds in 480. One more hundred is going to be 500, and then halfway between 400 and 500 is 450. So on this number line, we're needing to put 480, and we know that that's more than 450, so it'll probably go right around in here. So put that on your number line. And that shows us that 480 was closer to 500 than it was 400. So when we're rounding 480 to the nearest 100, it would round to 500. So hopefully you're getting to the point where when you're rounding to the nearest 100 and you're only working with 3-digit numbers, that it's getting to where you should be able to look at it and kind of just know what it rounds to, because when I look at 480, I know that it's going to be between 400 and 500, and I definitely know that 480 is a lot closer to 500 than it was 400, so I can tell just by looking at it that it would have rounded to 500. So for part B, I do want you to try and round 525 to the nearest 100 without a number line. Just ask yourself, what 2 hundreds is 525 between? What would be the bottom number and the top number on your number line? And then what is that closest to? So I do want you to attempt rounding this without the number line. If you feel like you can't do that, then draw yourself a number line. So I want you to go ahead and do B. Try it without a number line first. And then if you can't do that, you can use the number line. And then push play once you have your answer written right here to what 525 rounds to when you're rounding it to the nearest 100. Okay, so 525 would fall between 500 and 600, because the first thing you had to ask yourself was how many hundreds is in this number, and there's 5 hundreds in this number. So that would be our first one, and then one more 100 from 500 is 600. The number that would go in between those two would be 550, and this is less than 550, so that tells us that 525 is closer to 500 than it is 600. And I hope that you could have done that without the number line. These next ones are a little bit, well, I lied. D and E are trickier because they have thousands place in their numbers. So part C only is dealing with a 3-digit number still. So a container holds 750 milliliters of water, so we want to round that capacity to the nearest 100. So we're taking 750 and we're rounding that to the nearest hundred. So once again, I want you to attempt it without a number line. See if you can see which hundred 750 is closest to. If you need to draw a number line, you can do that. So go ahead and answer C and push play once you have that on your paper. Okay, so 750 I know has 7 hundreds, and then one more hundred from 700 would be 800. So that tells me that 750 is going to be in between 700 and 800. And 750 is actually the halfway point between 700 and 800. And anytime that we're at the halfway point, we automatically round up. So 750 rounds to 800. Once again, I hope that you could have done that without the number line. But for D and E, we are going to go ahead and draw number lines for these. So I'm just going to go ahead and draw 2. So if you want to draw 2 out to the side of your paper, you can go ahead and do that and get your 3 tick marks for top, middle, and bottom, because it's easier to use the number lines for right now when we're working with rounding to the nearest hundred, but we still have a number in the thousands place. Okay, so first one for D is 1,297. So you have to ask yourself how many hundreds are in that number. And I see that there are 2 hundreds in that number, so our bottom number is going to be 1,200. One more hundred from 1,200 is going to be 1,300. And then our middle point between 200 and 300 would be 250, so we've got 1,250. So we're going to have to put on our number line where 1,297 would go. 1,297 is very close to 1,300, because if I were to keep counting from 1,297, I would just have to add 3 more to get to 1,300. So that tells me that 1,297 is going to be very close to 1,300. So I'm going to put that like right up there, very close to it. And just by looking at this, you can see that 1,297 is definitely going to round to 1,300. Maybe some of you are getting to the point where when you're working with thousands place and you're still rounding to the nearest hundred, that it's getting easier for you, where you can think in your mind. Sometimes what I have to do is just block out, goodness gracious, I have to block out what's in the thousands place and just look at it like this. So if that's helpful to you, I don't care if you do that. You just have to remember that you have to put that 1,000 back on there. So like for the next one, let's just try it like that. Let's block out this 1 right here. And let's just look at 842. So rounding that 842 to the nearest hundred, you have to ask yourself how many hundreds are in 842. And I know that there are 8 hundreds in there, so I know that this is going to be between 800 and 900. So why don't you just write that on your piece of paper? We know that 842 is going to be between 800 and 900. So it's always good to still ask yourself what is halfway between those two numbers. And hopefully by now you're getting good at finding that halfway point. And halfway between 800 and 900 is 850. So we know that 842 is less than 850. So we know that 842 is actually going to be closer to 800 than it was 900. But once again, you have to remember to keep that thousands place there, and then we put our 800. So if that's helpful to you, I'm totally fine with you doing it that way, just crossing out what's in the thousands place, but remembering to add it on to your answer whenever you write down the rounded answer. Okay, so for number 3, it says circle the numbers that round to 600 when rounding to the nearest hundred. So out of all of these numbers, which ones would round to 600? So this is a lot to look at. There's no way that we're going to draw a number line for every single one of these. That's pointless. We should be able to look at them just to be able to see if they are closer to 600 than the other 100. So first things that we're going to have to do here is looking at the number is asking yourself what two hundreds is it between. So I've got 527, so I know that 527 would be between 500 and 600. So then I have to ask myself, is 527 closer to 500 or 600? And I know that it's definitely going to be closer to 500. So I'm not going to circle 527 because that does not round to 600. I'm only circling the numbers that round to 600. Okay, so moving on to the next one, I've got 550. 550 is going to be between 500 and 600. 550 is actually right at that halfway point between 500 and 600, so that tells me that since I'm at the halfway point that 550 would round up to 560, so you will be circling 550 because it does round up. Next one is 639. This is going to be between 600 and 700. And then you have to ask yourself, what is that halfway point between 600 and 700? And hopefully you're thinking that that halfway point between 600 and 700 is 650. So is 639 more than 650 or less than 650? So 639 is less than 650, so that tells us that it's closer to 600 than it would be to 700. So 639 we're going to circle as well. So I want you to go ahead and look at these next three numbers, and I want you to circle them if they round to 600, and then do not circle them if they do not round to 600. So go ahead and look at these next three, and then push play whenever you think you have your answer. Okay, so 681 would be between 600 and 700, and 681 is definitely closer to 700 than it is 600, so we're not going to circle 681. This next number is 713, so this would be between 700 and 800, so it's not even in the 600 range, so it's definitely not going to be 713. That would round to 700. And then 603 would be between 600 and 700, and we know most certainly that 603 is definitely closer to 600 than it is to 700, so you should have circled 603 as well. So for that one, you circled three numbers that would round to 600. Okay, so this is kind of like the one that we had on the previous problem set where someone is rounding and they tell what it rounds to, and you have to agree or disagree. So it says the teacher asks students to round 1,865 to the nearest hundred, and Christian says that it is 1,900. Alexis disagrees and says that it's 1900s. So who is correct? So first things first, what we're going to do here is we're going to draw a number line, and we're actually going to round it to see what it rounds to, and then we're going to see if they are correct or who is correct. So we've got 1,865, so I can see that it has 800s in it, so our bottom number is definitely going to be 1,800, and our top number is going to be 1,900 because that's the next hundred. And then halfway in between 800 and 900 is 1,850. So what I want you to do on your paper is put where 1,865 goes, and then put down what does 1,865 round to. So go ahead and get that on your number line and put down what it rounds to, and push play once you have that answered. Okay, so 1,865 probably goes somewhere right along in here, which shows us that it is closer to 1,900, so it is going to round to 1,900. So Christian said that it was rounding to 1,900, so we know that Christian is correct, but then it says Alexis disagrees and says it rounds to 1900s. And we've talked about this before in like our review. 1900s is the same thing as 1,900. So in this case, Alexis and Christian are correct. So they are both correct. And for this one, we don't necessarily have to explain our thinking because our number sentences right here did. by you writing 1900s is equal to 1900, and by you putting what the number actually rounded to, you can see that these two are the same. So what we wrote right there is actually us explaining our thinking. Okay, so now we are ready to move on to the exit ticket. Make sure you are reading each one carefully and rounding it as it's asking you to do. Once you have that done, you can bring it to me and I will go over it with you.